It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shante.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by the Norfus Firm. At the Norfus Firm, we solve people problems, and we have the great pleasure of working with employers all around the world on human resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Today, we're going to talk about buzzwords. It's like jazz hands.
There's so much buzz too around DEI and all the letters.
Exactly.
Whatever.
The alphabet soup.
Yeah.
So one of the buzzwords, and the word that a lot of organizations are trying to lean into, is inclusion. We have seen SHRM, which is the largest trade association for human resources professionals, I think, in the world. I think they boast of almost 400,000 members. They have removed equity from the D and the E and the I, although I think it's kind of funny how we're getting all these emails where the D and the E and the I are in SHRM's emails, but that's sort of a note for another day. And they're focusing on inclusion. We hear a lot about inclusion and belonging. Inclusion. We love inclusion, but it's definitely a buzzword.
Yeah, for sure.
Why do you think it's
I
a
think
buzzword?
it's the thing that, I think it's the one word that everyone can connect to, right? So, because if you think about the diversity, right, we always hear that, well, I'm not diverse, or I don't have a voice here because I don't, whatever, right? When we know that everyone has an aspect of them that is different from someone else, right? Because that's what diversity is. So people can't really sometimes connect to the word diverse or diversity. And then the equity, we don't even want to get started on what happens when people hear the word equity. It blows things up, weirdly, but it does. And so that's another one where not everyone can really get behind for whatever definition that they have that isn't the real definition of the word in their head, right? Because if you had the real definition, it actually wouldn't trigger you the way that you're being triggered. But again, semantics. So inclusion, I think, is
fair. Just say you
don't want to share. Just say you don't want to be fair and you don't want to share. That's just say it, right? Inclusion, I think, is the one that people can be like, well, yeah. I mean, we should all be able to show up and be here and have a place for us in this thing. So I think that's why people really lean into the inclusion, because that's the one word that I think everybody can, in some way, shape, or form, connect to. Unfortunately.
So, like, if we think about, and I think that's right, it's the most neutral of the three letters. Mm-hmm. If you add the B, if you do DEIB, inclusion is still the most neutral, because belonging is a feeling people have, so you can't make them feel a certain way.
Exactly.
It is a word that gets thrown around too, inclusion and belonging. But the reality is that it's neutral, right? It's kind of the word itself is not a problem for people, right? So, top line, how do you think companies win, and how do you know they win? Because we also have the data when they embed inclusion into their strategies.
Well, you see it in terms of how people show up. You see it in engagement scores. You see it in their profitability. Like, those are metrics, right? We can measure when people feel like they're a part of something, like they contribute more to an organization. And I think it's just the energy of a place. When culturally, if you think about organizational culture and leadership culture, when people feel like they are included and they can contribute and have a voice and a perspective that's valued, the energy of the place is just different. It shifts. And so you see a better result because people feel that they're included, which, again, you get down to the numbers when that happens. So it's important for folks to really understand that, because it's throughout all levels of the organization where this matters. It's just not in certain pockets or certain parts of it. All people will need to feel included at all levels, and they need to see that there's value there for them. Or else, I mean, why are we even here? We can find someplace else to work, right?
Right. And I think that when I'm listening to you, it brings up for me, like, when you talk about the engagement survey, most engagement surveys we see these days, including the ones we administer, ask do you feel, it asks some version of an inclusion question, right?
Mhm.
Do you feel like you can bring your authentic self to work? Do you feel included? Do you feel, there's these questions that get at it, right? So in that sort of people practice way, you could have your baseline and your follow-up proof pretty easily through surveying.
Yeah.
Where do people feel they are today as far as inclusion? What is our profitability today based on this score we have today? Like, if you not just looking at the engagement score metric, but tie it, right, to every other metric that's a top line thing you look at, and then survey again in 6 months and a year, and you will have, even if not causation, correlation. If you see increased inclusion scores where people feel more included than they did in previous scores, and how your business is performing, right? Like, we know this to be the case because we've seen it, but I'm saying, if you don't believe it, then go, if you're already doing engagement scores, you already have the data to be able to do this, like, go prove it to yourself. Now,
I think another thing that I'd want to add here is also just in terms of the creativity and the ideas and the problem solving that you see when folks feel that they're included.
yeah.
People are just they lean in. They want to actually support the business better as opposed to just being phoning it in, clocking, hitting the clock and just getting a check. They actually care if they feel included.
Let me tell
And
you
that's,
something.
important.
Do you know
Really
how
important.
many times I am so, like, pleasantly shocked by the ideas folks come up with in our team just after I say, does anybody else have any thoughts on, like, how we could do this better or whatever? There are so many times that Leah or Stephanie or Ray, they jump out with these ideas, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. That is so freaking cool. All because
Right.
I'm inviting other perspectives, right?
Right.
Like, it happens multiple times a week. And now I just know it's going to happen, right? I know we're with folks who are so smart and innovative and committed, and they want to do it, and just inviting them in. And now you don't even have to do that always. Like, it'll be like, oh, can I add something here? Yes, please. Like, let's hear
Yeah,
it.
come on.
Like, like someone coming
Exactly.
off me. That's how you know it's also just working well. Like, where it's like, okay, I've set the tone for give the ideas, because we want we want to do the best thing possible. I don't
Right.
necessarily have the best thing possible in my head. I have a lot of really stunning ideas, y'all. Trust. I'm not downplaying my ideas. I'm just saying I don't have them all. And when we have these kind, our especially our teams meetings where we're trying to figure out how to solve something, the input from all the people is such a beautiful part of the process, because then, so a lot of times we've had a menu of options.
Yeah, and you get to a better solution. You get to a
How often do
much
you
better
go to a
solution.
restaurant that if it only has like 10 things on the menu, your first thought is, I might not find something I like here. But when there's like
Exactly.
2 pages, and there's appetizers and there's salads and
Well, that might be overwhelming. That might be overwhelming to some folks.
well, I like options. I like
Too
to
many
eat too. Sorry, it's funny. My son is home from school and gave a really great piece of feedback. He said, "Can I give a piece of constructive feedback?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You give a lot of analogies," and I was like, "I know, I'm just trying to convey the point, but it's a good point." I just did it there. The menu option may not be the right one, so all right. When we think about, obviously, we spend a lot of time. I mean, this whole podcast was really built to drive inclusive leadership practices. But I think sometimes what we see is that inclusive leadership practices are treated like a side project. Being an inclusive leader is seen off to the side. What is the danger, Shante, of treating inclusion as a side project?
Ah, man, it really, like, what, there's so many. One is your own legacy as a leader. Like, what legacy do you want to leave? How do you want people to talk to you? I think about, like, with my father, passed away last April, hey dad, a lot of folks when we were at his service would come up to me afterwards and just tell me about the impact that he had on them and in their career growth or opportunities. My family's from Jamaica, as many of you all know, because I big up Jamaica. And my father was self-made. He educated himself. He got a little bit of support later on from his dad, but pretty much a lot of what he came into was of his own work, right? Um, and so, but he was very much one of those who would help give opportunities out and bring people in and pull people along. And so you think about it, like he would, put his arms around people. And so at the funeral, it was just great to hear that feedback and the people that came out and how well they spoke about my father because of who he was and what the impact that they had on and I'm getting like choked up about it, on their lives. And it's like, yeah, that's legacy. Right. So if you're not thinking about people, you're not really connecting with people, you're not being thoughtful about of opportunities and what makes sense for folks. It's like, how do you want people to talk about you at your funeral? Right? Like, well, maybe that might be extreme, but like, no, for real.
I think that because we talk about legacy all the time, right? Because you have to have a why for why you are out here in the world. If your main why is I just want to make the most money possible, there's still a value to being inclusive because inclusion leads to folks giving you better ideas, which inevitably will help you make more money. But going back to the example of your father, being at his, I was at the funeral service, and it was, and while I've met your mom, I didn't get a chance to meet your dad, and just from sitting there, you're like, the amount of times I heard them say he was larger than life in terms of how he showed up, and the images that went across the slideshow, and the very specific examples that folks gave of how he did something to improve their lives, that was impactful to me. But it also brought me back to when my grandfather passed away, right? And like, and we had to get a bigger church just to house all the people who wanted to come see him, because the church that he had been a deacon of was like 50 people. And my whole, when I got up to speak about him, I literally had written all my talking points about impact, the impact he had on people. My grandfather was uneducated, but he supported all of he had 1 trillion grandchildren, but if you told him you were graduating, he somehow got on a plane and ended up, like my grandfather, I think by the time I graduated from high school, he probably had like 30 grandchildren. He came to DC to my high school graduation. He came to DC to my law school graduation. We had a full church of people who loved Frank Northus because of the impact he had. He worked until he couldn't. He was a crossing guard when he stopped working the steel mill. Like he was in the church. He found a way to lead in a way that brought people with him, as did Roy Gordon, right? Like, so you look at those legacies, and since we're not put here just to produce, it's sort of like, what do you want? So that's sort of the like more esoteric, who are you? What do you want the world to think about you, when you leave, as a way of guiding your behaviors on a daily basis. We understand that may not drive most people. So the other flip side of the risk of treating inclusion as a side project is people leave. You hear that whole adage, people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses.
Yep.
And when I think about the jobs that I liked the least, it was the bosses, right? Yes. It was like not feeling like they gave a crap about me, that they didn't bring me into things that I needed to understand to do my job well. I think about like my very first job as a lawyer, and the partner that I worked with the most would just send me back documents with lots of red writing on it. And these are things I had never done before because I was a brand new lawyer out of law school. And I just found the practice to be so cruel, because I'm like, I don't know. I still don't know what this means. I can read your words and I can try to make the revisions, but some of them are just, you're telling me to go do something I don't know how to do. Mm-hmm. So that is discouraging, right? So If you think about not being inclusive and thoughtful of those you work with, you can diminish the power of the work they can do just by not being thoughtful.
And it creates a level of apathy within for the folks that you lead or manage, right? Like I don't feel like you are really trying to call me in, like pull me into this, I'm gonna do the bare minimum.
Exactly.
The bare minimum.
That's the quiet quitting, right? Like quiet quitting is not just because of inclusion, to be clear, right? Quiet quitting can come because people don't think they're getting paid enough, and all of those things that relate to other issues. But when folks are like, oh, you're not even you're not even listening to what I'm saying. Oh, well, whatever. I'm going to just type this information in. That's what they want me to do. I'm not even going to try to do anything better. I'm just going to be here at this computer. I'm not coming to team events. I'm not turning my camera on when we're on Zoom calls. I am literally showing up to check boxes. So that's dangerous, right?
Very.
To retention, to innovation, to the like. So if we're thinking about, well, how do you make inclusion one of your competitive advantages, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing is embedding it in your hiring and leadership development practices, right?
And what are practical ways to do that? Because that gets thrown around a lot too. Like, become an inclusive leader, and you should be inclusive in your leadership, and inclusion is, you know what I mean? Like, okay.
Well, that's the buzzy part of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, guys, so what does that mean? So when you're thinking about hiring, for example, an example of an inclusive hiring tactic or practice is include people outside your department in the interview process. Think about people the person you're going to hire might interact with in your company outside of your immediate team, right? So, like, in certain respects, I think this is typically pretty automatic. So, like, I think lawyers probably get interviewed by a lot of people outside the legal department. Like when I was interviewing, you interview with a chief human resources officer because that would be my main client. So there's a build-in to certain positions where you probably are doing that, or at least should be doing that, because you're hiring someone who's got to serve other departments. Right. But if you're hiring someone in marketing, have someone from operations come in to the interview so you get a more fulsome view, because in many companies, operations and marketing are at odds because they don't collaborate. Marketing comes up with these flashy ideas and operations are like, we can't do that. And so then it's like, right? Like it's that piece of think about the position you're hiring for more holistically. Where would they fit in your organization? And how do you make sure you test for that in your interview process? Right. If we're thinking about retaining top talent, it does come from not just gathering people's input, like through engagement surveys and the like, but showing that you're listening, either because you're going to implement something that you heard from them, you're not, and why, right? Like, let people know that you heard their voice completely and like what you're doing with it. That gets at the retention. And then the last piece around leadership development is hire people like us to come in and help people, train people, and coach people on how to do it, right? Give that resource of experts to help, right, move folks along. Right. So what are other ways?
Spots for leadership development?
Well, thinking about how we make inclusion a competitive advantage.
Oh, how we make it a competitive? I mean, there's obviously the external part of it, right? In terms of the marketing and who you're attracting, who you're going after, in terms of your client base, so your consumer base. Making sure that you're being responsive to the marketplace, and not just catering to certain demographics. Now, obviously, you do what's best for your business, right? We're never going to tell you to run afoul of your business. Never going to do that. But some of y'all do things that actually do that because you're not being thoughtful of the broader environment in which you work in, right? Like, and you're actually doing your business a disservice because you are so quick to either kowtow to certain things or fall sway into certain messages or political influence or whatever it is. Again, I got to bring Jamie Dimon back from Chase. We talked about him in the last episode, but the fact that he stands 10 toes down on it. He's like, no, diversity is important to my business. So I need to understand who's out here that I can get money from. It's basically what he's talking about. And and I respect it. He's like, you're not gonna limit my profitability because y'all are on some whatever this is over here. No, he's like, I'm gonna go out and understand and then I'm gonna make sure that who's in my organization understands what's happening with the folks outside my organization so that I know I can get to them in the best, most efficient way possible without the hiccups. Because again, we've seen this with marketing campaigns where, not the right people were in the room and they got messed up.
What I can think of a number of client examples or either through focus groups or one-on-one interviews. An investigation I'm doing right now includes this component that your marketing materials don't reflect your consumer base, right? Meaning, like, we have a nonprofit client where they had some marketing brochure that was like promoting their program, and it was like all white people in the marketing brochure when the vast majority of the folks that come to them are people of color. So of course employees are calling that out, and they do that because it's like, well, I'm here, how am I not even represented on this? And what about all those people out in the marketplace that we're going out for? They're not going to see themselves on this this pamphlet, this advertisement either. And so I think this is a good example that gets us to another way in which inclusion can be a competitive advantage, and that's through decision making.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Inclusive decision making. What does that look like when folks are good at that?
It's just really making sure that before you actually get to the decision, are you being thoughtful of, again, stakeholders who's either impacting or impacted by whatever decision you need to make? And have you considered their voices, perspectives, opinions in the decision that needs to be made? And if you haven't, you probably should. Because that we've had clients where they didn't do that, and whole initiatives have been blown up, and then you got to call us because now we have to come in and try to help get things
quell
back
the
on track.
conflict, help you figure out how to not do this
Yeah.
again. And
But
like, I mean, you've created the frameworks with clients around
yeah,
inclusive decision making. And the reality is that in the beginning, it does take a little bit of time to get used to. It does require proper change management and making sure you're properly, once you've developed the framework, that you're applying it in a way that's facilitated so you can see where the kinks and the things are that you might need to fix. But in the end, then it just becomes habitual. It's
right.
again, it's kind of like the way I lead, right? It's like, have I talked to all the people who would have a view on this? And look, sometimes, I can be over inclusive, right? But I prefer that than to know that I had the answer right under our proverbial roof, but just failed to include people in the process, right? And it
Yeah,
also means that you have to be okay with telling people that's a really great idea, but we can't do that, right? Because
can't
of
do it
course
right
you're going
now.
to get a lot of ideas, and you don't want people to be discouraged. It's like, that was a great idea, not this time, but like, let's like keep thinking in that way. That's an easy way for you to
Sure.
also develop people, right? And help them
Yeah.
go down a path of success.
And you need discernment, right? You do, as a leader, you do need discernment in these things, and you do get to a point where you can't constantly get information outside all the places because you can get into a paralysis situation, right? Analysis paralysis. You do, as a leader, have to be decisive at some point, sure. But all we're doing is encouraging you to, in the early stages, at least sit down and scope it out. Some people just go. That happened. We saw that recently, where this dude just came through doing all sorts of changes in his part of the organization, and then got complaints. People filed complaints against him. You had to come in and do a couple of investigations. It's like, hey, slow down. Just be thoughtful. Just be thoughtful. Just be thoughtful.
All right. So when we think about like sort of what we're conveying today, inclusion is just a natural human desire. We all want to be included. So think about how you do that to apply it to your business. When we think about DEI, it's not just about have a bunch of diverse people in your organization. It's how do you ensure they want to stay, and inclusion helps with retention. It helps with innovation, right? So thinking about how your business evolves, and then even if you don't have formal money or budgets for DEI right now, you can be an inclusive leader every day for free, because we have many episodes you can go back and watch, but all of these are things that go to your legacy, to use Shantae's point from the beginning of who you are as a person.
Oh, you're getting more little stars behind you.
So being thoughtful of, if nothing else, how you want to show up in the world, and what it takes to do that. We'll be back. We got lots to talk about. We really appreciate you listening. Find us on the web at thenorthisfirm.com/podcast. YouTube. I leave YouTube out a lot, but that's where you could see us if you want to see us, We're on all the things. We'd love to hear what you want to hear about and how you feel about what we're talking about. So we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Here it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with.